Bernice McKinley tugged at her weathered leather jacket, scanning the lively dojo, her sharp eyes searching across the room for her next challenger. The Eagle Claw Academy vibrated with energy as Morning Form's training wrapped up, and Bernice valued these instances when pupils' family came to collect them. It gave her chances to show everyone who really was in charge of this place. Gwendolyn Parker went through the wooden sliding doors, her tired eyes immediately searching for her 16-year-old daughter, Robin. The familiar scent of wood polish and sweat filled her senses as she located her near the practice dummies, working through a kata with 2 other girls. "Robin, time to go home," she called gently, sitting down on a sturdy stool in the viewing area. At 43, Gwendolyn had long ago stopped stressing about looking good. Her worn slacks and simple blouse showed she valued usefulness over fashion. Her blonde hair was styled in a practical bun, and her face held the subtle lines of someone who'd learned that true strength came from inside. Bernice finished her loud criticisms of a group of beginning students, her powerful voice echoing off the bamboo walls. Her Grandmaster black belt hung from its prominent display rack, and she never missed a chance to point out her achievements. "Keep that stance solid, Peterson. My old poodle hits harder than that." She insulted a struggling boy. The other students exchanged worried glances, their respect mixed with fear. Gwendolyn watched silently, observing Bernice's form. Solid fundamentals, remarkable power, but her ego was plain. She'd encountered her type before in her earlier life, good enough to dominate local areas, successful enough to trust their own hype. "Master McKinley really pushes them hard," said one guardian to another nearby. "But Robin has improved a lot since joining here." "She definitely demands obedience," the other replied, though her tone suggested she doubted her method. 20 minutes later, Robin ran over, her face flushed from exertion. "Ready, Mom. Just need to grab my gear." "Of course, dear. How was training?" "Excellent. Master showed us some new defense moves. She thinks I might be prepared for my first junior competition next month." Happiness flooded Gwendolyn's heart. Robin had dealt with bullies at school before finding martial arts, and seeing her gain confidence made every sacrifice worthwhile. As they gathered her equipment, Bernice's voice cut through the background noise. "Wait a minute, everyone, before we end practice. Who wants to see something educational?" The academy went quiet, all attention shifting to the master. Gwendolyn felt a strange tension building in her chest. Bernice's gaze moved across the room before stopping on her, a calculating smile forming on her rough face. "You know what? I think we need a reminder about the difference between trained fighters and regular folks. Some martial artists shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of their regular routine." "Mom, let's just leave," Robin whispered, tugging at her arm. But Bernice wasn't done. She walked across the tatami-covered floor with an exaggerated strut, her footsteps echoing in the now tense environment. Other parents glanced around anxiously, unsure if this was planned instruction or something more worrying. Gwendolyn stood up slowly, her protective senses warning her of danger. Whatever Bernice planned, she felt it wouldn't end well. Bernice stopped directly in front of Gwendolyn, her 6'2" frame towering over her modest 5'4" height. The entire dojo had become unnaturally silent. Even the teenagers who'd been giggling moments before now watched with uneasy quiet. "Ma'am," Bernice announced loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "I don't think we've been formally introduced. You're Robin's mother, right?" "That's right," Gwendolyn replied steadily, her voice calm despite the tension filling the air. Bernice's smile widened, but it held no warmth. "Well, since you're here watching our training, I was wondering if you've ever considered actual martial arts yourself." Gwendolyn felt Robin's hand find hers, her palm damp with nervous sweat. "Not really," she answered truthfully. "Oh, come on," Bernice continued, her tone becoming more dramatic as she performed for her audience. I'm sure you've seen those movies thinking you could kick like that, right? Most people do. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Gwendolyn noticed some parents looking away, clearly uneasy with where this was going. Actually, I don't watch martial arts movies much, Gwendolyn said, keeping her cool. We should probably go home. Robin has studying to do. But Bernice wasn't finished with her show. She moved another step closer, her voice lowering just enough to seem conversational while still carrying throughout the dojo. You know what? I have a better idea. How about a little demonstration? Nothing serious, just a quick sparring match to show everyone the difference between real training and, well, fantasy. Robin's face went pale. Master McKinley, my mum doesn't... It's okay, honey, Gwendolyn interrupted softly, though her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. Bernice clapped her hands together, the sharp sound making some people flinch. Great. Don't worry, Mrs. Parker. I'll be gentle with you. Wouldn't want to hurt someone who's never thrown a real punch. The contempt in her voice was obvious. Gwendolyn could see the other martial artists shifting uncomfortably, some seeming ashamed of their master's behavior, others excited by the prospect of entertainment. This really isn't necessary, Gwendolyn said, her voice staying steady. Oh, but it is, Bernice insisted, spreading her arms wide. See, too many people think they're tough because of what they watch on TV. It's important to understand the reality of actual combat training versus suburban mum yoga classes. The insult hung in the air like smoke. Gwendolyn felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but a familiar coldness she hadn't felt in years. Besides, Bernice continued, now clearly enjoying herself, what's the worst that could happen? A few light moves, maybe a throw or two. Consider it a free lesson in reality. Around the room, reactions were mixed. Some fighters looked horrified by their master's actions, while others seemed caught up in the drama. The other guardians seemed torn between intervening and staying out of it. Gwendolyn looked down at Robin, whose eyes were wide with worry and shame. Then she looked back at Bernice, whose smug expression suggested she was already savoring her sure victory. One condition, Gwendolyn said quietly. Bernice raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? When this is over, you apologize to your students for this show. Bernice's laughter echoed through the dojo, sharp and mocking. Apologize? Lady, you're going to be the one apologizing to the mat when you hit it. Some fighters cringed at their master's cruelty, but Gwendolyn's expression stayed the same. She simply nodded and began taking off her blouse, revealing strong, toned arms that spoke of years of dedicated training. Mom, Robin whispered urgently, you don't have to do this. Gwendolyn squeezed her daughter's hand gently. Sometimes, honey, bullies need to be reminded that strength comes in many forms. As Gwendolyn moved toward the center of the ring, her movement suddenly changed. The shuffling walk of a tired suburban mother melted away, replaced by the smooth, measured steps of someone who understood combat on a deep level. Bernice, busy adjusting her gloves and playing to her audience, missed the change entirely. All right, folks, gather around. Let's make this educational. What Bernice didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that Gwendolyn Parker had once been Gwendolyn Lee, three-time World Wushu champion. For 10 years, she dominated the forms and weapons divisions, earning the nickname Silent Leopard for her calm demeanor and quick strikes. She'd retired suddenly at 28, not from loss or injury, but from betrayal. Her coach, also her husband, had been caught taking bribes to fix matches. The scandal had been overwhelming. If she hadn't been so focused on competing, she might have seen what he was doing. Gwendolyn had walked away from everything, the titles, the sponsorships, the life she'd built. She'd moved across the country and vowed never to fight again. For 15 years, she'd kept that promise, pouring her energy into raising Robin and building a quiet life as a physical therapist. But now, watching Bernice's smug face as she explained to her students how real fighters handled wannabes, Gwendolyn felt the old fire stirring, not for fame or competition, but for something more important: honor. "You ready, Mrs. Parker?" Bernice called out, bouncing lightly on her toes in what she probably thought was an intimidating display. Gwendolyn centered herself in the ring, her breathing becoming deeper and more controlled. Around her, the watching crowd grew quieter, sensing something they couldn't quite name. "Just remember," Bernice announced to her audience, "this is why we train hard. You can't fake experience." The irony of her words wasn't lost on Gwendolyn. She'd faced Olympic athletes, professional masters, and fighters who'd given their entire lives to perfection. Bernice, for all her regional success, was about to learn what real experience looked like. "Any last words before we start?" Bernice asked, her tone dripping with fake politeness. Gwendolyn looked directly into her eyes for the first time since this ordeal began. What Bernice saw there made her take an involuntary step backward. Not fear or uncertainty, but the cold, calculating gaze of a predator who'd been playing prey. "Yes," Gwendolyn said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent dojo. "You might want to remember that the most dangerous fighters are often the ones who choose not to show their skills." Bernice's confident smirk wavered slightly, but her pride wouldn't let her back down now. "All right then," Bernice said, shaking off her momentary uncertainty. "Let's get this over with." She began shadowboxing flamboyantly, throwing elaborate moves clearly designed to scare. The other fighters watched with a mix of excitement and worry, while the Guardians looked more and more uneasy with the entire situation. Gwendolyn, meanwhile, stood perfectly still in the center of the ring. Her breathing had become deep and rhythmic, and those few people who knew what to look for might have noticed the subtle change in her stance, the slight lowering of her center of gravity, the way her weight had distributed evenly across both feet. "Mom, please," Robin whispered from ringside. "You don't have anything to prove." Gwendolyn turned to her daughter with a gentle smile. "Sometimes, sweetheart, it's not about proving anything. It's about teaching." Bernice finished her warm-up with a flourish, throwing a series of techniques that whistled audibly through the silence. "Hope you've been saying your prayers, Mrs. Parker. This might sting a little." Around the room, some parents exchanged worried glances. This had gone far beyond a simple demonstration. Bernice's behavior was becoming truly concerning. Gwendolyn could hear the murmurs, but paid them no attention. Instead, she closed her eyes briefly, allowing muscle memory to come back. Her body remembered everything: the endless hours of training, the exact timing of blocks, the feel of an opponent's rhythm, and how to break it. When she opened her eyes, something fundamental had changed. The tired suburban mom was gone, replaced by someone who moved with predatory grace. Bernice noticed the change and frowned. "You've been holding out on us, haven't you? Taken a few kickboxing classes at the gym?" "Something like that," Gwendolyn replied softly. "Well, no matter. A little weekend warrior training won't help you here." Bernice began circling her slowly, still playing to her audience. "See, folks, this is what happens when people overestimate their abilities. Real martial arts isn't like the movies." Gwendolyn remained motionless in the center, turning only her head to track her movement. To an untrained eye, she looked passive, almost defenseless, but to anyone who understood fighting, her stillness was unnerving, like a coiled snake waiting for the right moment to strike. "The thing about martial arts," Bernice continued her lecture while circling, "is that it takes years to develop real skill. You can't just watch a few videos and think you're ready for the real thing." "You're absolutely right," Gwendolyn agreed, her voice carrying an odd note that made some people look at her more closely. Bernice paused her circling, clearly surprised by her agreement. "Exactly. So maybe we should just call this off before—" "No," Gwendolyn interrupted gently. You wanted to teach a lesson about real martial arts. Let's teach one. The certainty in her voice sent a ripple of unease through the room. Even Bernice seemed to sense that something had shifted, though her pride kept her from backing down. "Fine," she said, settling into what she thought was an intimidating fighting stance. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Bernice launched forward with a textbook front kick-punch combination, the kind of attack she'd probably used successfully against countless amateurs. It was fast, technically sound, and delivered with the full weight of her considerable frame behind it. It never came close to landing. Gwendolyn moved like wind flowing around a tree. She deflected the kick with minimal arm movement, then stepped off the line of attack at precisely the right moment to let the punch slice through empty air where her face had been a split second before. The movement was so subtle, so economical, that some observers weren't even sure she'd moved at all. Bernice stumbled slightly, her momentum carrying her past her intended target. Her eyes widened in confusion. Those moves should have connected. She'd used that combination successfully hundreds of times before. "Lucky block," she muttered, resetting her stance. "Won't happen twice." Gwendolyn said nothing, simply returned to her centered position and waited. This time, Bernice tried a more complex combination. Block, punch, sweep, strike. Each move was technically proficient, thrown with the confidence of someone who'd never been seriously challenged. Each move found nothing but air. Gwendolyn moved like smoke, her arms deflecting moves by millimeters, her body swaying just out of range with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic to watch. She never looked rushed, never seemed off balance. It was as if she could see each attack coming seconds before Bernice herself knew what she was going to throw. Around the room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The excited chatter had died completely, replaced by an electric tension that made everyone hold their breath. Even the youngest fighters could sense they were witnessing something extraordinary. Bernice's confidence began to crack. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she realized none of her attacks were even close to connecting. "Stand still and fight!" she snarled, launching into a more aggressive series of strikes. Gwendolyn continued her ethereal dance, avoiding each technique with minimal effort. But now something else was happening. She was moving closer with each evasion, subtly closing the distance, while Bernice exhausted herself, throwing more and more desperate attacks. "What's she doing?" whispered one of the teenage fighters. "She's making her tired," observed another more perceptively. Bernice threw a wild, spinning back fist, putting everything she had behind it. Gwendolyn ducked under it smoothly and, for the first time, touched her. Just a light tap on her exposed ribs as she spun past her. The touch was so gentle it couldn't have hurt a child, but it sent a clear message. "I could have hurt you there, but I chose not to." Bernice spun around, her face flushed with exertion and growing panic. "What are you playing at? Fight back." "I am fighting," Gwendolyn said quietly. "I'm just choosing how." The depth of her statement hung in the air. She wasn't running or cowering. She was showing a level of control that none of them had ever seen before. Bernice, her breath coming in ragged gasps, made one final desperate attempt. She dropped low and lunged forward, trying to grab and use her weight advantage to overwhelm her. It was exactly the wrong move against exactly the wrong person. As Bernice lunged forward, Gwendolyn did something that defied everything the watching crowd thought they understood about martial arts and physics. She didn't try to back away or defend against the grab. Instead, she stepped forward into it. Her movement was so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that Bernice's forward momentum worked against her. Gwendolyn's hands found her shoulders, and using a technique that looked almost gentle, she guided her energy downward and to the side while stepping away. Bernice crashed to the canvas with a resounding thud that echoed through the silent dojo. The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Bernice lay still for a moment, stunned not just by the impact, but by the complete impossibility of what had just happened. She'd been the aggressor. She'd had all the momentum, and somehow she'd ended up on the canvas while her opponent stood calmly above her, not even breathing hard. Bernice pushed herself up on her elbows, staring at Gwendolyn with a mix of confusion and dawning respect. "How did you do that?" Gwendolyn extended her hand to help her up. 20 years of practice before I ever stepped away from the ring." Bernice ignored the offered hand and scrambled to her feet on her own, her face burning with embarrassment and wounded pride. Around the room, her fighters watched with wide eyes, seeing their seemingly invincible master reduced to a confused, humbled woman. "That's impossible," Bernice muttered. You're just a mom, a regular person." "No," Gwendolyn said gently but firmly. "I'm a person who chose to step away from martial arts to focus on what really mattered, raising my daughter. But that doesn't mean I forgot everything I learned." The truth hit the room like a wave. This wasn't some lucky amateur who'd gotten in a few good moves. This was someone who operated on a completely different level, someone who'd been holding back so dramatically that the entire confrontation had been less a fight than a lesson. Robin stepped forward, her eyes bright with tears of pride and relief. "Mom was Gwendolyn Lee," she announced to the stunned room. "Three-time world wushu champion. She retired when I was little." The silence that followed was deafening. Some of the older fighters pulled out their phones, clearly searching for the name. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to awe as they found videos and articles about Gwendolyn's legendary career. Bernice's face went through a series of emotions: shock, embarrassment, and finally something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. She looked around at her fighters, then back at Gwendolyn. I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "And I owe them one too." She gestured toward her fighters. "This wasn't teaching, this was bullying." Gwendolyn nodded. "The strongest thing you can do is admit when you're wrong. Your fighters will respect you more for it, not less." Bernice straightened her shoulders and turned to face her class. "Everyone, I made a serious mistake today. I let my ego make decisions that my brain should have made. Mrs. Parker showed me what real martial arts looks like. Not just the techniques, but the wisdom to know when and how to use them." The dojo remained silent as the weight of the lesson settled over everyone present. Gwendolyn gathered her jacket and moved toward Robin, who looked at her with newfound respect and understanding. As they prepared to leave, Bernice called out softly, "Mrs. Parker." She turned back to her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me what real strength looks like." Gwendolyn smiled gently. "Real strength is what you do next, Master McKinley. How you choose to lead from here." As mother and daughter walked toward the exit, the dojo slowly began to buzz with quiet conversation. The fighters looked at their master with new eyes, seeing someone who'd been humbled but not broken, taught rather than defeated. Bernice stood in the center of the ring, looking around at faces that held not mockery, but respect for her willingness to learn. For the first time in years, she felt like she might actually become the teacher her fighters deserved.